This is my hypothesis. Isaac Netero traveled to the Dark Continent. There he met Jing Freaks on the shoreline of Lake Mobius. Netero then returned to the human realm with the first half of Don's book, Journey to the New World. Netero then gave a copy of that book to Jing Freaks, which started his obsession with the Dark Continent, while Zig stayed behind to travel with Don. That's my thinking. Now let's see if it works. Hello and welcome to the New World Review, your source for everything anime and manga, and today we're here to discuss quite possibly the only successful return journey to the Dark Continent that we know of, being the Netero expedition. And we're doing this because I was posed an intriguing question by a user named Raging Miku, who inquired as to whether or not Zig, a member of this expedition, was still alive. Because there is some very interesting information to suggest that he may have actually died. However, as I looked further into it, a much bigger picture started to unravel, threatening to provide potential answers to many of our lingering questions. So I think it's about time that we examined the mysteries behind the Netero voyage. And it's all going to begin with a quick round of Netero or Neta-No, a very simple minigame, the rules of which are as follows. I am going to ask you a multiple choice trivia question about our former chairman, and should you answer incorrectly, then your punishment will be to subscribe to the New World Review, which will result in consistent injections of hunt-based content administered directly into your YouTube feed. Meanwhile, if you are correct, then you will be awarded with a slap on the butt from the 100 type Guanyin Bodhisattva. So here is our trivia question. How old was Netero when he began training in the mountains? A, 45, B, 46, or C, 47. All fairly reasonable sounding midlife states of being, so please do make your choice now and we shall reveal the answer in 3, 2, 1, and bam, it was B, 46 years old. So if you guessed incorrectly, then you know the thing to do, and please do say hi in the comments below if you are new to our association. Welcome. But let's begin with the official story. Here's a guy. His name is Steiner, and he is important because he is a powerful bureaucrat within the IPA, an organization which is designed to regulate travel to and from the Dark Continent. In a very short amount of time, Steiner has become one of the world's foremost authorities on the Dark Continent, due primarily to having read a very fun book called Journey to the New World East Edition, which was of course penned by the almost mythical figure of Jing Freaks. In addition to this, Steiner has information on all officially recorded human journeys to the Dark Continent, which according to him come to a grand total of 149 ventures. Of those 149, only 5 expeditions had people return from the continent, which assumes that the other 144 had a 100% casualty rate. Now, of the 5 voyages which did see individuals return, there were only 28 survivors in total, and of those 28, only 3 of them were able to reintegrate into society. And according to official statistics, that would be a survival rate of 0.04%. Fairly terrifying. But I bring this up because the number 3 gets speculated on here and there for being a bit awkward, primarily because 3 is not 4. And 4 is the number of characters we know of who have visited the continent and potentially returned. So we have Isaac Netero, Linné O'Derv, Zig, and of course Beyond Netero. And given that we know for a fact that Netero, Linné, and Beyond all returned, it can be easy at face value to assign Zig with a rather unfortunate fate because he is the 4th known character of a maximum of 3 confirmed survivors. But what does get missed quite a bit is that Steiner also states that of those 3, Beyond is the only one alive today, which more or less confirms that Steiner is unaware of Netero's unofficial journey. Because sure, Netero is now dead, however Linné is still alive and well, so it should be at least 2 survivors if they were factored in. So luckily for Zig, this gives him a lot of potential to, not be dead. To complicate matters though, this is another thing that often gets overlooked, but Netero actually set foot on the Dark Continent twice, according to him. One of these occasions is the unofficial voyage that we are exploring in this video, but the other is completely unknown. It's almost certainly another sneaky unofficial trip, because the voyages with survivors that we know of were all conducted by the V5 nations, who did so without informing the Hunter Association. Very sneaky of them. But meaning that Netero likely would have had no involvement with them. But the most interesting thing Steiner says is that mankind has never succeeded at making a round trip. But then he has this brief inner thought where he thinks to himself, not officially, implying that he may have knowledge of some unofficial journeys, or just showing us that Steiner has a healthy dose of skepticism about him, realizing all of the potential faults in officially collated knowledge. And one question that Steiner may have failed to ask at this point is, where did their Dark Continent knowledge come from? Who published Journey to the New World? Because it was written by Jing Freaks, yes, but it was clearly not published or distributed by him. So that leaves us with a mystery publisher, which leads us quite nicely now into Jing Freaks. Jing is a unique man for about a billion different reasons. However, on this occasion, he possesses some pretty insane knowledge. In fact, it's only because of Jing that we even know about Netero's voyage to begin with. Jing dropped that massive nugget when he was explaining the dangers of the Dark Continent to Beyond's expedition team. And this is pretty huge because you need to ask, why Jing? And you can't say that sure he knew because he was a Zodiac in the Hunter Association and they have all kinds of special knowledge of Netero stuffery, because they don't, or they do, but not so much on this. Jing is the only one who knew, because weirdly enough, some of the Zodiacs didn't even know that the Dark Continent existed. And even the one who had the most intimate knowledge of it, Pariston, was himself unaware of Netero's journey. So for whatever reason, Jing Freaks was entrusted with this knowledge, something that Netero clearly had no inclination of giving up on a whim. And we know that it was Netero who told Jing directly, because Jing even quotes the former chairman's words, which were, "This place is too big. It's off the charts." And this decision to tell Jing and Jing alone is why I propose that on Netero's unofficial voyage, that he may have encountered Don Freaks. Now it's hard to put a timeline on exactly when Netero visited the Dark Continent. However, judging by his hair length and general aesthetic presentation, as well as Netero's own words that he visited the continent when he was quite young, this would imply that Netero visited prior to his training in the mountains at the age of 46, which is actually a pretty massive thing to point out because now we're talking about Netero before he achieved his enlightened god mode Nen abilities. He was still likely quite powerful, but nowhere near the incarnation of him that we're familiar with, and perhaps visiting the continent is what prompted Netero to take some time to reflect in the human world. That doesn't necessarily matter though, because we do know for a fact that Don would have been on the Dark Continent at the same time as Netero's group, because he initially set out to explore the landmass roughly 300 years ago. And now I think the hurdle that may come up in this discussion is, well, how did they encounter each other? It's hard to pin down, but Don may have literally had a couple of centuries of head start on Netero exploring the continent, so there's no way they could have met, yeah? Well, no, in fact, not yeah. In fact, no. The hundreds of years of exploration thing may be true, but we also need to keep Don Freaks' mission in mind. He did not set out to explore the depths of the Dark Continent. His goal was to spend his life traveling the shoreline of Lake Mobius and logging his experiences. So look, it's all about chance here, but at any given time over the last 300 years, Don Freaks was theoretically reachable, depending on which part of the human world you set out from and which part of the continent you landed on. So my proposal is that Netero and his party happened to land on a piece of shoreline very close to where Don was currently traveling, which may actually explain quite a bit. For example, how did Netero survive the Dark Continent? Given that he was more of a sprightly young brat at the time, there was a very real risk of death. And stumbling across Don, a man who was very well versed in Dark Continent survival, may very well have saved his life. And not only that, but extended his life. Because fun thing here, prior to his death, Netero was at least 110 years old. I emphasize the whole at least thing because it's implied that he was almost certainly way older. But even the baseline of 110 is insane because humans in Hunter x Hunter follow a more real world life expectancy. Take Xenozoldyck for example. He's only 67 and he looks even older than Netero did at least twice his age. Now Don Freaks did find an answer to this whole aging problem, which was the substance of nitro rice, a food item on the Dark Continent that extends one's life, which was logged in his journal, and it actually inspired one of the official voyages to embark and find it, although they did fail. They failed catastrophically. And it seems very unlikely that Netero and his group would have just stumbled upon the substance by sheer luck, but if Don were to have shared some of his already gathered nitro rice, then it would explain why both Netero and Linné have lived the absurdly long lives they have. That or scenarios could get slightly more complicated. For example, Netero meets Don on the first voyage, learns of the rice, and then sets out on a second expedition to acquire it. That's one of a ton of possible different scenarios, but the thing I keep coming back to is how the writing of Don Freaks returned to the human world. It's been said that Journey to the New World East Edition was published, quote, several centuries ago, which is very vague, but then again, so is Netero's age. I mean, given that he was known to fight against Xenozoldyck's grandfather Maha, it's impossible to tell just how long this man may have existed, which is why I think it's entirely possible that Netero met Don Freaks on the Dark Continent and was entrusted with delivering the first half of his book to humanity, which would have been in Netero's best interest because he was the one who seriously pushed for travel to the Dark Continent to be forbidden. So this book would have served as a fine warning to most not to risk opening Pandora's box. However, it also goes on to reinforce the Jing connection. However many years back, decades, maybe even centuries later, this bright young go-getter by the name of Jing Freaks took the Hunter exam and was the only one of his year to pass. Jing has a demonstrated interest in archaeology and human history, and recognizing that delicious Freaks lineage, Isaac Netero decided to tell him about at least one of his Dark Continent expeditions, and may have even piqued his interest by pointing him in the direction of Don's book. And then you know what? A whole generation later, Netero would encounter yet another Freaks by the name of Gon, a child which he took an unusual interest in, although when you've already met two exceptional members of the Freaks clan, I'm sure that Gon's potential would have been very easy to see, especially when accompanied by a Zoldyck, a family with whom Netero seems to share an even deeper history, which actually leads us back to Zig. He still has a big question mark over his head with a few potential solutions. One thought we do need to establish is that Zig and Maha Zoldyck may be the same person. I'm not going to go into huge detail about this because I have a whole different video exploring that topic, but it is a fairly solid evidence-backed thought. Another possibility is that, just as suggested by the person who inspired this video, Zig Zoldyck may be dead. Given Netero's apparent inexperience when he landed on the Dark Continent with Zig and Lene, a casualty would have not at all been unexpected. Zig could have died, and that may even be a reason for Maha Zoldyck to fight Netero as an endeavor of familial revenge. But the third and most outlandish possibility is that, for whatever reason, Zig may have chosen to stay on the Dark Continent and travel with Don Freaks. And I'm not gonna lie, I like this idea primarily because it would involve forging another Freak-Zoldyck duo and really wrapping up Hunter x Hunter in a nice, neat little narrative package. But it is 100% pure speculation. There's just something very appealing to me about Netero leaving the Dark Continent, with his last image being of a Freaks and a Zoldyck standing side by side. Then, potentially centuries later, during the 287th Hunter exam, in comes Gon Freaks and Killua Zoldyck, causing a wave of untold nostalgia within Netero, and hence why he took such a strong interest in both of them, even to the point where he allowed them both to participate in the Chimera Ant mission. The question is, would Togashi do such a thing? And honestly, I'm not so sure. Hunter x Hunter doesn't usually end up being that neat and or satisfying. However, Togashi was really laying some very nice foundations with this whole Dark Continent business, and I can only hope that we get to explore the deeper story of these characters in the future. But to explore some more, here is another video. It's about hunters and hunting, which is that thing that you like, because there's always more to learn, explore, and experience with this wonderful series, so I look forward to seeing you there.